We do all kinds of things here at Word in Your Ear.
We do podcasts.
We do video casts.
Quizzes.
Crowdcasts with famous authors.
And we can guarantee to make your next birthday one you will never forget.
There's only one way to make sure you get all of this, you get it in full, and you get it first.
And that's by becoming a supporter on Patreon.
Details here.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
So great. Look, for as long as Dave and I have been reading Rolling Stone, there has been one of its team who's been a beacon of exquisite writing and impeccable taste. And we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by him now, a proper rock press legend. It's the great David Fricke. David, lovely to see you.
Gentlemen,
Fantastic
thank you very much. It's nice to see you from afar.
And looking slightly Neil Young 1972, I'm saying. I always thought of you as a bit more Ramones, but you're less Kemps than you were.
Leather jacket, it's definitely Ramones. I go for Neil, 74, 75, Time Fades Away. A lot of Blue Cheer in there. Mark Garner, Grand Funk Railroad. I saw their first tour in 1969, and they were super badass. So, I figure I'm going to let my freak flag fly.
Absolutely. I almost cut my hair. Exactly.
Never cut my hair.
Dave and I constantly obsessed by this idea of who had the longest hair in rock. It's an old podcast, Chestnut. And I always thought it was either Artemis Pyle of, I think, Lynyrd Skynyrd, or the guy from the Alice Cooper band, but I can't remember his name now. But the drummer of the Alice Cooper band.
The drummer, they all had really long hair.
Ridiculously long.
You took the five of them, and they could be like a wig industry. But I think Neil Smith, the drummer, he probably won by maybe a handful of inches over Glenn Buxton, the guitar player.
Very good.
I was also throwing in Jim Dandy from Black Oak, Arkansas.
Their first album is an absolute Stone classic. It really is, man. Produced by Lee Dorman, the bass player in Iron Butterfly.
Wow,
and engineered by Tom Dowden.
We've been doing these things for a year, and I don't think we've ever mentioned Iron Butterfly and Blue Cheer.
No, we have had Iron Butterfly. I can't remember why somebody mentioned Inagada Davida, which I remember being very moved by, aged whatever I was.
I actually did, a few years ago, I did liner notes for Rhino, did a double CD package of Iron Butterfly's 4 sets at the Fillmore East in April of 1968. I actually have the poster from that gig. I wasn't there, but a friend of mine gave me the original poster. Fillmore East. Also on the band headlining was Traffic. Blue Cheer was in the middle. And Iron Butterfly opened. A month later, Iron Butterfly recorded Inagada Davida at Ultrasonic Studios in Long Island. The producer, Shadow Morton.
Of course. Now tell me about Fillmore bills, because very often they had 3 acts, but usually in a very odd order, didn't they? So the biggest one didn't always go last. Is that right? Because the last was quite late.
The one time they used to do 2 shows a night, which meant it was a long night. If you have an 8 o'clock start, the second show's at 11, you're talking 2, 3 in the morning. And if it's the Allman Brothers, the sun comes up by the time.
You've got to take sandwiches and a thermos of soup.
The one time I went, I was in school in Allentown, Pennsylvania. A friend of mine used to drive up to New York to the Fillmore quite often, and he got us tickets to see the Kinks in December of 1970. He was a big Kinks freak, and it was the Lola tour, Lola versus Power Man. And the bill was the Kinks at the top. The middle was Arthur Lee and Love. Now, this is the band that had recorded Out Here and False Start. And the opening act was a trio from Britain called Quatermass that had one album.
Okay. Johnny Gustafson.
Brilliant night. Absolutely brilliant night. And I've still got my program. Arthur Lee, I remember they sounded really good, but he had some issue with sound. And as he walked off, he threw his guitar at the guy at the side of the stage, which was either Bill Graham himself or it might have been Kip Cohen, who was, I think, the house manager at the Fillmore East in New York at that time. But I got to see Arthur Lee on stage in 1970. And the Kinks, who killed, and Quatermass in their only New York show.
So what was the first show you ever saw? Can you remember?
I can show you the ticket.
Oh, God, what?
You mentioned, where was it? Allenstown in Pennsylvania. That's where you grew up, right?
I'm originally from Philadelphia.
Allentown. Yeah.
I went to college in Philly. Went to college in Allentown. I'm from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And the first show I went to, I don't know if you're going to be able to catch this.
We'll have a go.
My hands shake a little bit.
Can't see that. No, Philadelphia Music
English,
Festival.
the Troggs. I can see the Troggs.
The English Invasion, the Who, the Troggs, the pretty things.
The Who, Procol Harum.
Oh, what?
It's $1 to get in.
Oh, what? So when are we talking?
24th, 1968, a Wednesday evening, JFK Stadium.
Wow. Procol Harum.
But the story
the Troggs.
is that actually none of those bands played. Because
you didn't mind.
Procol Harum could not get their visa, apparently. The Troggs, I don't know why they didn't show up.
Well, this is Troggs.
The opening act was a local band called Friends of the Family, who I have their one single on Smash Records, which is actually quite good. The next band was Pink Floyd. It was David Gilmour's first tour with the band in the U.S. They were fourth on the bill. They were just touring Saucer Full of Secrets.
Yeah.
They did, I'm guessing, maybe 40 minutes to an hour. Astronomy Domini. They did play Saucer Full of Secrets. I definitely remember Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. And the next band that came on was a group not on the bill originally called the Mandela from Canada. It was an open stadium, JFK. There was a lightning storm. If I remember correctly, the guitar player in the Mandela got electrocuted. There was a short in the mic when he went up to it.
All this on the first gig you ever saw,
and
so
they
the band gets electrocuted.
And they sent everybody home, so the Who never played.
Oh, really?
So the follow-on is about 2 years ago. I did an interview with Nick Mason for PBS television here, and I said to him, I said, first time I saw you guys was in Philly at JFK Stadium. There was a lightning storm. The show was canceled, and the Who never played. And he said, funny, I remember that because after we played, we went to the local FM station. I think it was probably WMMR at the time, and to do some radio promo. And we got there, and Keith Moon was running around because they'd had nothing to do. So he simply went to the radio station and started looning about. So they ended up being on the radio all night with Keith and the guys in the Floyd. But that was my first gig, and it was $1 to get in. And I was supposed to go with a friend of mine. I would have been maybe just turned 16. It was my first gig. It was a show way down in South Philly, so we had to take a really long subway ride through some pretty dodgy areas. And at the last minute, my friend canceled, and my father went. He went with me, and he agreed to sit 3 rows away from me, so it looked like I was with my dad.
Oh, that's so fantastic!
And he witnessed the electrocution and everything.
Did he think of it?
All the things that his
son
regarded as entertainment.
Yeah, what was the conversation on the way home? That's fascinating. What did he think of it?
He was just sort of like, really?
But
I will say that my father traveled a lot in his work, and over the next years, he would go to Europe, England, the Middle East, Australia, and he would actually bring back records for me. He didn't really know music at all, but he would go into record stores and he'd go, look, my kid collects records. What do you got? What's cool? What would he like? And I remember the first batch he ever brought back, and this would have been 1968, probably not long after this. He came back from England with Truth by the Jeff Beck Group in mono.
Very good.
Nice. Thoughts of Emerald Stabjack in mono, and the first Move album in mono.
Christ,
that was the first 3 he brought back.
Well,
he went to Germany. He went to Germany and came back with the first Faust album and the first 2 Can albums.
That's amazing.
That's incredible.
Well,
that must have had some currency, because how many of your mates would have had copies of those?
Nobody.
Very hard to get hold of. Probably not even available on import.
That you couldn't even buy those on import.
That's incredible.
So that was.
What was the music? Can you remember the music playing in your house?
He ever brought back.
Yeah,
and that's one thing I've never gotten rid of. If you brought a record back, I've still got it.
You still got it.
What can you remember playing in your house when you were a kid growing up? What kind of stuff were they playing? on the record machine?
There wasn't a lot of music in the house. We had a record player that was actually attached to the television. It was just like a 45 player, didn't play albums.
Yeah.
And so, there were just like kids' records, Tubby the Tuba,
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I have all of those records. I did save them. But when I started, the first single I bought for myself, it would have been after I started learning to play guitar, which I was about 13.
Yeah.
I have my original Gretsch Clipper from 1965. First single I bought was Painted Black.
Right.
Stones. The second one was Good Lovin' by the Young Rascals.
Right.
Yeah.
Both really killing records. But the first album I ever bought, which was not long after that, was... Oops.
Whoa.
Pardon me.
Oh, Paul Revere and the
yeah.
Raiders. Yes.
Yeah.
A closed book in the UK. Explain to us about Paul Revere and the Raiders.
It's true. I think that may be their first appearance on this show, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest albums ever made. Track for track, it kills. It's sort of like a Nuggets record with Beach Boys production.
Yeah.
Terry Melcher was their producer, son of Doris Day.
Yeah.
Mark Lindsay and Terry wrote most of the songs. And this album actually has 3 classic hits on it: Hungry, The Great Airplane Strike, and Good Thing. And then everything else on it is just a winner. They're songs written by the bass player and the drummer, but they're really good. Spirit 67, the original mono, that is the copy I bought.
Yeah. That's
so
wonderful.
Were they named as a riposte to the British invasion, or was it just completely
Revere
independent?
was the keyboard player. His real name was Paul Revere Dick. His last name was Dick. He changed it to Paul Revere, but he was actually born Paul Revere.
Oh, I see.
And so he came by it entirely honestly. He did not sing. He did not write. He was the keyboard player, but he was the business brains. And he was apparently, I believe, I did some liner notes for a very early compilation. I think at one point he was a hairdresser. He actually ran a salon. But Paul Revere and the Raiders were the band in the Northwest in the early 60s. They were bigger than the Wailers, bigger than the Sonics, bigger than any of those bands. They actually did the first commercial version of Louie Louie before the Kingsmen's record hit. And they were the first rock and roll signing to Columbia Records.
Right.
I always thought that they were a British invasion homage, actually, too.
They were doing this in the Northwest before the Beatles got signed by George Martin.
Right.
Can I just ask, did you feel, I mean, for people like Dave and I in England, there was an incredible romance about American music at the time. The American music, just the freedom and the West Coast and the beaches and the life and the cars, and there was something incredibly exotic about your image of America that you'd received through listening to pop records. Did you guys feel the same way in any way about the UK? I don't know. It's very hard for us to imagine that you did.
Actually, I certainly did.
What aspect?
The idea that all of this was happening in a very, well, to me, far off place. I'm growing up in a row house in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The idea that there were these events happening in London or Liverpool or even San Francisco, anywhere but Philly. But the fact was, Philly was also an amazing music town. We had great top 40 stations, and we were a great soul town. We had Gamble and Huff making records in the 60s with Soul Survivors, Jerry Butler, Dusty Springfield, local groups like the Volcanoes, Storm Warning on Arctic Records, one of the great. Daryl Hall and John Oates were playing at the Uptown Theater, which was our version of the Apollo, and on bills with the Temptations. So really, in a way, I really idealized these other places where music was made, but I also recognized that Philadelphia was a fantastic music town. And I actually collect records by Philadelphia psych bands from the late 60s and early 70s, like Mandrake Memorial, Elizabeth, Sweet Stave and Chain.
Yeah.
I collect all of those, singles and LPs.
Do you still have
It was an amazing scene.
Still talk about this, and in Britain we can't imagine it really. local scenes, because in Britain it was a small country, you tended to have one, if you had a hit, you got on top of the pops and everybody in the nation knew about you the following day and they all went and bought it the weekend. Whereas in America, you traditionally had local scenes, didn't you? Local heroes. Yeah. Do you still have that?
I think it's less so now because everything is so internet driven. And I think that's a bit of a loss because I feel every town, every city has its own psychological makeup.
It does. Its own character, completely.
Whether it's food, whether it's the history of the place. And I see that still to some degree when, say, I go to Austin, Texas. You get a bit of that still in San Francisco, although less so now because it's so Menlo Park oriented.
Yeah.
It's all the tech,
sure.
sort of thing. But I'll tell you, growing up in America in the 60s was a pretty extraordinary experience. And even though I was dreaming of being somewhere else, the fact was I had the opportunities to sample that through radio, getting early copies of Rolling Stone. I was reading Downbeat in the high school library, so I was reading about Zappa and Coltrane at the same time, and as a high school student, and starting to collect records and just trying to find everything I could that was. I just wanted music.
Yeah,
I wanted music. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to play it, and.
Can you remember the first review you wrote? I was trying to think that you wrote. Was it Circus or Trouser Press and people you wrote before you were Rolling Stone?
The first review that I got paid for
that
I wrote was for a local paper in Philadelphia called The Drummer. It was the local underground weekly.
Yeah.
And I had written in my school paper and done radio there. And thought, I'm going to give it a crack. I was a big fan of Rolling Stone and Cream and all of the underground papers, Chicago Seed, Berkeley Barb, etc. So I thought, I'll give it a crack. So I reviewed an album by an American folk singer named Patrick Skye. It was an album called Songs That Made America Famous. It was basically a scabrous, satirical collection of songs about America, democracy, revolution, conservatism. And I just sent it in over the transom, as we say, and it got published. And I didn't know about it because the editor lost my cover letter. And so I called him up and said, that thing you just published, I did it. And he was really glad to hear from me. He sent me a check for $5 that I did.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic!
I did not cash it because I wanted it as a reminder that I could do this. And to this day, that editor, Matt Damsker, is one of my best friends.
That's a lovely story.
And you still haven't spent the check. You still haven't cashed the check.
Second review I did for him was the first album by the New York Dolls.
I couldn't cash my first check either. I've still got a photograph of myself holding it.
I did.
Oh no, it was brilliant. It was 4 lots of £8 for 4 reviews in Record Mirror. So it was 32 quid, which was a lot of money, actually.
$5 could buy you a couple of albums. So,
absolutely.
I considered it, but it was the fact of it. I could actually do this, and so that I decided,
So at that stage, you started getting free records too. So.
A few, but mostly I was still buying. And then, the more I got published and the more, I started getting jobs. I actually did eventually become a staff editor at The Drummer, so I was getting a lot of tickets and a lot of records. And then I moved to New York in 1978, and that continued in a very glorious fashion. And, the result is everything you see behind me.
Is it too terrible to ask how many records you think you have? Have you got a vague idea?
Because this is actually just what you see.
Yeah, we're in the annex, Mark. We're in the annex.
Yeah.
This is an apartment, so there is no attic.
Yeah.
But the last time I counted was when we moved into this apartment, and that was in early 1992, and it was 10,000 then. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Do you cull them occasionally at all, or do you hang on to everything?
not as often as the missus would like.
Right.
That's a routine experience for everybody.
I'm getting the wagging finger from
He never calls it. Never gets rid of anything at all. Not at all.
I like records.
Yeah.
I like music. I like being surrounded by it, and I'm lucky enough to have that. And it's come in extremely handy for the last year, certainly.
Yeah. I bet.
So give us some idea of the flavor of life on Rolling Stone in, what was it, 1978, 79 when you joined?
Well, I moved to New York in 78. I had my first story published as a freelancer while I was still in Philly. That was in the fall of 77.
Yeah.
I started freelancing for them in 79 under the great Paul Nelson, the record review editor.
Oh, right.
Critic. And I eventually got a job there as a staff writer in 1985, initially as a temp, because my very good friend Kurt Loder, who was a staff writer there, was working on his Tina book.
Yeah.
And so they hired me basically for 6 months while he was off doing his Tina book. And the fact was, I just never left.
Yeah.
I managed to do well enough that they hired me full time, and I was there full time, and until June of 2015. They had some changes and layoffs. I was one of them, but I continued writing for them up through the summer of 2019. But since then, I've been doing mostly freelancing, liner notes, and I do a lot of radio work. I'm a regular.
Yeah, you've got a couple of shows, haven't you?
On Sirius.
Tom Petty show and Sirius. Yeah.
So that's, I'm still doing it.
Tell us about Paul Nelson, because I'm interested in Paul Nelson. I've kind of half read a book about Paul Nelson. He was an exceptional figure, wasn't he? Because he wasn't just a journalist. He was very influential as an A&R man and so forth.
He was originally from Minnesota, and so he was one of Dylan's original running buddies in Minneapolis way back in the day. This is like late 50s, not even before Dylan is entertaining these notions of coming to New York. And very astute, very incisive, incredibly just brilliant and direct taste. Like one of the, he was very tight with Kerner, Ray, and Glover, who were a major blues revival act for Jack Holtzman at Elektra. Their original album, Blues, Rags, and Hollers, was recorded in Minneapolis and issued independently and became such a sensation that Elektra picked it up and made a number of records for them. Paul did a lot of liner notes. He was doing kind of unofficial A&R. He was an editor of a very important folk, I don't even want to call it a fanzine, it was more like a journal called the Little Sandy Review, which was, sort of like broadside in its being just like a voice of that community. And he then became really what was the original rock critic establishment with Robert Christgau, Grill Marcus, Lester Bennings. He was an A&R man at Mercury and did in fact sign the New York Dolls.
Yeah.
And then was a record review editor at Rolling Stone in the late 70s and early 80s. And that's when I started working for the magazine as a freelancer. Paul was just an incredible mentor.
Because wasn't he was the guy who told Rod Stewart, because Rod Stewart signed to Mercury, he was the guy who told Rod Stewart to record Tomorrow Is a Long Time, or all those obscure Bob Dylan songs.
Because
he was also one of the people
Paul
who
knew those songs.
Absolutely. Because wasn't he the person whose record collection was pretty much stolen by Bob Dylan when he was at university and never returned it, and pretty much, recorded all those songs.
Built an entire career. You're absolutely right. Built an entire career out of all those obscure songs because no one else had a copy of. That's right.
And he was also one of those people who showed David Bowie around in 1971.
Great intellectuals, very soft-spoken. But I remember I was reviewing the third Dire Straits album, Making Movies, for the magazine for him. And it was a lead review. It was one of my first. I had a couple of lead reviews before that, but I did this review, and I thought I really described it really well. I really felt great about the record. I thought it was a real breakthrough for Mark Knopfler. And I remember getting a phone call from Paul saying, look, I think this review is really good. The beginning, the end are really strong. You're missing something in the middle. You're not really getting to the lyrics. And I was like, well, in what way? And he started just sort of talking out his ideas of what he felt some of this songwriting was about. And I could kind of tell that in some ways he was speaking about himself refracted through this writing.
Yeah.
And it was a real lesson because on one hand, I always felt that in many reviews, people didn't talk about the actual music.
No,
they tended
absolutely.
to quote lyrics.
Yeah, or just write about the career of the group.
Right. You didn't actually describe what music sounded like, which is one of the hardest things to do.
Because it's so difficult, yeah.
And I remember Dave Marsh actually saying to me once, he ran into me at the elevator at the magazine saying, introduced himself, and he said, I really like what you're doing. You don't just quote lyrics. You're actually writing about music. But what Paul said was you've got to listen deeper to the words. There's more there than you've heard. And that was a lesson I took with me all the way, not just in that piece, but since then. It's like you really have to listen to things more than once. You've got to listen to them in context, and not just the context of the writer, but, what are you hearing? What are you filtering?
Well, we always used to feel that there should be two types of reviews. One is your instant reaction, because the newspapers and magazines are under such pressure to get the first review out onto the street. And then there's the second review, which is where you live with it for a while. You can really evaluate, different qualities of it and work out whether it's any good.
Well, I remember Paul Williams, basically the founding father of rock criticism, who founded Crawdaddy in 1966. He actually told me that he felt that this notion that, you reviewed the record as soon as it came out was a problem, because what you were reviewing was your first reaction, not the deepest. And, sometimes the first cut is the deepest, but you don't know that until you've done it for a while.
Or often you're actually reviewing the record before, because you still haven't quite moved on. You're reviewing your mental image of what that group kind of sounds like,
I gotta say, I've been lucky in having some of the great sort of mentors to help me along. Paul Nelson, Dave Marsh, Paul Williams. I was hired as the American correspondent for Melody Maker in 1980 by Ray Coleman.
You remember it.
Right.
And Mike Oldfield, who followed him there, still a very good friend of mine. He was a great supporter. John Perellis at the New York Times, my friend Kurt Loder, who's one of the great writers, and Karen Berg, the writers that I read, like Ellen Willis, Lester Bangs. I did get to meet him once, and that was a very memorable experience, because it was at the apartment of the guitarist Gary Lucas, who at that point was managing Captain Beefheart. He invited me and Lester over to get a preview of Doc at the radar station. And so I got to sit with Lester and listen to Beefheart all night. And then Gary got Don Van Vliet, Beefheart, on the phone to talk to us. So I got to watch him talk to Don, and then I got to talk to Don as well, who I'd already met, but still, what a night with Lester Bangs listening to Doc at the radar station.
That's fantastic. How accurate was the portrayal of Lester Bangs in what would have been Almost Famous, I suppose, wasn't it, Dave?
It was very accurate in the sense that Cameron Crowe, who wrote the film, he knew Lester really well, and what I think he did with that character as portrayed by Philip Seymour Hoffman, he got to Lester's idealism, which people tended to discount because he was such a wild romantic figure. But Lester had really intense ideals, and he was actually very soft-spoken. And that night, he wasn't wild and crazy. That was almost like something you did when you're expected to do it.
I'm sure.
But when you're actually listening to music, nobody actually acts like a schmuck while they're listening to music. You listen, you're taking it in. And it was clear that, that night as we were listening, Lester was listening really intently. And when Don got on the phone, he and Lester had talked before. And it was like hearing two like-minded great spirits.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't hear Don's version of the conversation, but I knew what it was like when I got on the line with him and when I had talked with him. And you could tell that these were two guys who really cared about music and about these very strange and arcane sources that had brought this music forth.
How do you reflect on I mean, you've spent a long time at Rolling Stone. It's a long time.
Yeah, I saw some stuff, yeah.
Yeah. No, but how do you reflect on that? You know, because it's such a sort of saga, isn't it? It certainly appears from a distance. It rose to a pinnacle of power, and then kind of slowly that power drained away. It seemed to me, looking at it from
that's true of history in general. Nobody expected the Roman Empire to last as long as it did. You know, what happened to the 1,000-year Reich? You know, I was lucky enough to be there. I was lucky enough to be exposed to it when the magazine was beginning. I actually got my first subscription. My first issue was in the fall of '68. The Stones for Beggar's Banquet. That's the first one I bought. And I've still got it buried in here somewhere. But as a subscriber and then starting to write for them as a freelancer and then being on staff starting in the mid-'80s, I think I actually got to see the entire ride. And in many ways, that ride reflected changes in the culture rather than in the direction of the magazine itself. Certainly the access I was getting to artists like the Stones and U2, Metallica, the Velvets, etc., might not have been the same as it was when Lester was on the road or Lisa Robinson was touring with the Stones. But I had an access that was certainly still a lot more open, and you had interactions with people in a way that, you know, brought the stories to life and brought the music to life.
We were so envious of that on the UK press because Rolling Stone had this tradition where people would travel for, literally for 2 months on a European tour, upon which to base one 4,000-word feature. It was fantastic.
But what you did was you boiled all that down. And so, yes, I got to go to Morocco with the Stones for Steel Wheels and watch them work with the master musicians of Jajouka. But I also had to bring back the story that went with it. It wasn't just me having a wild time with Mick and Keith. And I think that one of the reasons that I survived as long as I did was I got there at a point when there was an element of it was always a professional operation. One thing that people forget is that when Jan started Rolling Stone, from the very beginning, he modeled it in some ways on the New Yorker because he had a research department.
Yeah.
You didn't have a research department at Cream or at Fusion. That's just not how they were run. But it meant that, and there is that scene in Almost Famous where the reporter brings back his material and the researcher's drilling him on this stuff.
Yeah.
That was that was regular. That happened with every piece, whether it was a record review, a news story. You checked your facts. And if the facts weren't there, what's the point of publishing it?
Yeah.
Then you develop, but you get a voice at the same time. And I think one of the reasons I survived as long as I did was I didn't treat it as a lark. I treated it as a job.
Yeah.
It was a profession. And I wanted to do the best job I could with the time and the materials that I had. And, it was a lesson that I learned over time, but it meant that I actually got a lot out of these experiences because I put a lot into it, whether it was research, the kinds of questions you would ask, simply being attentive to what's going on around you. You're not there to drink up the rider. If you get along with the band and they know you're there to work, they'll offer you the beer.
Yeah.
And that was something, I learned that pretty early on, and it was a lesson that proved really valuable because I think it really gave me an access and an ability to take that access and give it some kind of life on the page.
We must get back to your records in a minute, but I just can't resist asking whether there's just a couple of really charismatic people that because you've interviewed so many people. Are there a couple of people who really struck you as being enormously impressive.
Man, I've been extremely fortunate. I couldn't even, I can tell you the people that I didn't get to interview, but partly because they left early.
Oh, okay.
Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison.
Oh, right, okay.
But I have since written a lot about Hendrix for liner notes, for stories. I've done a lot of liner notes for the Doors. I've had the chance to have those conversations with John Densmore and Robbie Krieger, the late Ray Manzarek. People that struck me, I'm just going to give a few examples of people that actually I've had continuing conversations with, so that you actually have an evolving journalistic relationship. Patti Smith, Lou Reed, and John Cale. Actually, everybody in the Velvets. Sterling, Mo, Mick and Keith, certainly, and Charlie Watts. Right. One of the great interviews, and one of the things that I always wanted to do with the magazine and could never get it together, not because I didn't want to, but either it wasn't the right time or Charlie wasn't interested. I wanted to do the Rolling Stone interview with Charlie Watts. The full Megillah, no filter, the stories that guy could tell.
Would be wonderful.
And that was one of the things, that was the one that got away, but not for lack of trying. I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Ornette Coleman. I interviewed Marvin Gaye for Melody Maker in 1983. I just wrote about that for Mojo, actually, a feature that I just did on what's going on, and that's going to be out in one of their next issues. But I got to interview Marvin Gaye, who was a complete space cadet, but at the time, but even then said some really sort of insightful and incisive things that in a way almost I don't want to say predicted, but you can understand why he ended up leaving like a year later. He was dead within 10 months of my interview. Right. Man, who else? Crazy.
No, it's an impossible question to answer.
Bob Marley. I interviewed Bob Marley in 1978, and that was actually a very fun experience. I was working for a magazine called Good Times out in Long Island. It was a free weekly, and Marley's publicist was a fascinating guy at Island Records named Charles Comer. He was Irish, and a real character, but great fun to be around, and would move the earth to get you a good opportunity. And he got me the opportunity to interview Bob Marley in New York in 1978. And I'm a huge reggae fan. I was buying the records as imports very early on, and actually worked as a promoter for a Bob Marley show in Cleveland in 1976. But I'm sitting there interviewing Bob Marley, and he's got two kind of his Rasta buddies with him. They're kind of like a tribunal, and they're talking in this very heavy patois. They got the hippie there. He's, they're having a little bit of fun. I get it. But it's a good conversation. I'm enjoying it. And at one point, I said something about the spirituality of what he was writing and the qualities of reggae, the Rastafarian doctrine, etc. And I said, one of the things is, people always talk about herb as a sacrament. This is an important part of it. And I said, I don't smoke herb. I don't smoke at all. And yet I feel like I've got a connection to this music myself, spiritually. And suddenly Marley sat up and he looked at me and said, "You don't smoke?" I said, "No." And he and the two Rastas, just like their eyes went wide. And Marley went into this rap. All of a sudden, I could understand every single word he said. It was just astonishing to him that someone could listen to this music, feel like they've got the connection and not be part of it.
Yeah.
And after it was, and everything calmed down and we finished up and everything was very cordial. Afterwards, I had a friend of mine at Island Records, Lister Hewan Lowe. He was Jamaican, a really great guy. And he helped me transcribe the tape. And we were listening back, and he started cracking up. He said, "This is the most hysterical thing I've ever heard. I've never heard Bob talk like this. This is just so brilliant. You actually got something out of him that he completely did not expect. It was almost like out of his control. And I still have that tape.
Yeah, I'm going to say, do you keep tapes? Generally speaking, do you keep tapes? I was thinking about this only today.
I have some things. I tried to be diligent. Certain things have obviously gone walking. I have a surprising number of very early pieces from before I worked at Rolling Stone, like the Marvin Gaye, Bob Marley, and I particularly treasure two C90s that I have of John Cipollina from Quicksilver Messenger.
Right.
A guy who did not do a lot of interviews. He came through New York in 1983, the fall of '83, also in '84, and I interviewed him for Musician magazine.
But in the box set boom, you can imagine absolutely nothing. It would be passed up now. Why wouldn't they have an extra kind of file somewhere in a box set with your interview with? They might, it's possible.
What's happened is that over time, as I've done more liner notes, I've been able to go back to
original
things.
tapes.
And, I did Lou Reed, the New York box that came out last year, and I interviewed Lou for that album on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of first-person reminiscence from him about the making and the writing of that record.
Yeah, fantastic.
No one else would have had. So
yeah,
I've tried to hold on to transcripts. It's an apartment. I do the best I can. But
yeah.
What I have, I really treasure, and what I don't have, I know exists in print somewhere.
So what else have you got any other stuff there that you've dug out? Any artifacts?
Well, I have actually. This is the first jazz record I ever bought.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's rather unique because it's a Miles Davis 45.
Oh, there are not many of those.
Yeah.
And
which one is it? Oh,
Great Expectations.
This was a record I bought in 1970 at a record store in Philadelphia. I'd read about Bitches Brew.
Yeah.
And I couldn't afford the double album, but they had this 45. So I thought, I'll take that. It's like 70 cents. And it turns out these were two tracks that Miles recorded after Bitches Brew that were not on an album. And it's just like these 3-minute sort of like Bitches Brew type jams with John McLaughlin, that whole mob. And these pieces, their full lengths, were eventually released on, one of them I think was on an album called Directions, compilations. It turns out the original pieces were 25 minutes long.
Right.
Some bright spark at Columbia Records thought this was a great jukebox idea. Cut these down to 3 minutes, put them on a 45 and sell them. I'm the only guy who probably bought it, because I've never seen this single anywhere else.
Well, isn't that the way that lots of Miles Davis records were made from the 70s onwards, wasn't it? What's the name of the producer who did all these things? Because he died. Yeah, and he died a few years ago, didn't he?
Yeah. What Miles would do was bring the band into the studio. They'd start playing, and sometimes there'd be a riff, a vamp, or as in the case of Jack Johnson, the band just starts to play. And Miles walks in, he likes what he's hearing, he joins in, and then Tio would take all of these tracks and essentially edit things together. Subsequently, you've been able to get complete performances and reissues and such, but he was actually, creating, not so much sampling, but creating, these tapestries of performance and, building almost coherent, cohesive, if not coherent.
He organized it into tracks, didn't he?
He was organizing the music out of these performances. And I remember I was interviewing Dave Liebman, who played sax with Miles on the Corner. And I was doing a piece on that period in Miles's life for Mojo. And Dave Liebman told me that at one point Miles had tried to get him in his band, but Dave was playing, I think, he was playing with somebody else. It might have been Chico Hamilton or Tony Williams. I forget who it was. But Dave was actually at the dentist, and he gets a call at the dentist's from his mother saying, this guy just called the house. He said, his name was, it might have been Tio who called him, if not Miles. He said, this guy called and said, you need to get to the studio now. And so he leaves the dentist. Apparently he's got his horn with him. He drives into New York to the Columbia Recording Studios, walks in, and Miles is there with the band. They're playing, and he just motions Dave to come in tells him to start playing. Dave Liebman starts playing. What they recorded was the beginning of On the Corner. Right. And he did it right from the dentist's office.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. And the idea of the songwriting royalty is so complicated. I mean, how do you ever work that out? I'm sure none of those people were ever properly rewarded for their contributions.
Well, I'm just lucky that I get these stories.
Yeah.
I have enough grounding that I can sort of like bring things out, but then when this stuff comes back to me, it's like, wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They say the guy who played the sax at the beginning of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. He just played the big.
I just did that piece for Mojo on What's Going On. Eli Fontaine.
And they just said, that'll do.
Well, he was warming up.
Yes.
He was warming up for the take.
Yeah.
The tape was running, and apparently he sort of stopped and was saying, "What's the take?" And Marvin said, "Oh, you're done.
You're done. You can go."
That was the lick. That's what I want.
Absolutely perfect.
That's amazing.
Have you spent much time in recording studios in the course of your work?
I've actually had some really good experiences in studios. I got to watch Mick and Keith separately working on Steel Wheels. I got to see Mick do like vocal takes, and he literally does dance in front of the mic.
Right, yeah.
Physically enacting the words as he sings. Keith, same way, playing guitar. It's an overdub, but he's into the crouch, and the physical positions are part of the expression of the playing. I've seen U2 work, Green Day. I've actually seen a lot of folks, Metallica.
Right.
And I actually did appear as a singer on a single by the Australian band Silverchair. In 1996, I think it was.
Yeah.
96 maybe. They were in New York. They were working on their second album. They were working on some B-sides for the record. Actually, I really loved that band. I thought they were fantastic. Daniel John, singer and guitar player. Ben Gillis, the drummer. Chris Junot, the bass player. They were just a great young teenage power trio. They were in New York, and I knew the producer, Nick Launay, because he had worked with Midnight Oil, and I knew those guys a lot. And he says, come on down to the studio. We're cutting some B-sides, and in the studio with them is one of my favorite guitar players, Dennis Tech from Radio Birdman. Originally from Michigan, resident in Australia, Radio Birdman, big influence on Australian punk.
Yeah, they had some big hit single in 1980.
They're cutting a cover of Radio Birdman's New Race. And I'm like, oh, great, I'm there. So I go down, and I'm watching them cut the track, and I'm having a great time. And they're about to do the background vocals. There's a chant, yeah, hup, that's part of the song, the original, and they're going to do that in the studio. So Dennis Tech and all the guys from Silverchair get around a couple of mics, and Nick Launay says, hey, get on in there. I said, okay. So I walked right in. I stood there with Dennis and the band, and we did a couple of takes, yeah, hup, all through the song. And I thought, oh, that was great fun.
Are you credited?
I'm credited on the B side of the original Australian single, and the A side went to #1.
I'm saying you've had a #1 record.
I am probably.
Well, Dave and I don't want to trump you or anything, but Dave and I once appeared on a Divine Comedy album. So there we go.
Oh God!
I probably
thinking about cricket.
I'm probably the only working rock critic that has been on a #1 record.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'll be true.
Yeah, it's true.
So yeah, that's one of my studios. I've probably got a few others that I'd have.
Very good. So any more sleeves there? Any more treasured possessions that you've dug out?
This is a record that I very prize very much.
Oh God, I can't see it.
Great
Someone
Society.
tell us. Oh, that's Grace Slick.
This
Is the original
version.
Yeah.
Of the Great Society of Somebody to Love.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
Someone to love.
Yeah.
I found it. It's worth quite a few $100s now.
Yeah,
I found it in a London record store, -0. Those guys who used to work in Notting Hill, they had a store near, just off Portobello Road in Notting Hill.
Yeah.
And I saw it in the box, and it was the English equivalent of $15.
Right.
And I thought, man, that's a lot of bread. And then I left and I went, God, what an idiot. I said, how could I have thought that? And of course, by then, the store was closed. So I thought, okay, I got to go back tomorrow and hope it's still there. And I went back. It was still there. It was $15.
Right. Right.
And it's the original on North.
What a sound investment.
What most people don't know is that record, it was Grace, her brother-in-law, Darby Slick, wrote the song. Her husband at the time, Jerry Slick, was the drummer. The producer was Sly Stone.
Yes.
He worked for Tom Donahue at Autumn Records.
Autumn Records,
and
yes.
North Beach was one of their subsidiary labels, and Sly Stone produced that record. Apparently, it took him about 150 takes, but that's a different problem.
So, do you ever sell any records? You've clearly got loads of rare stuff.
I've culled, but I've never sold anything that I felt.
Right.
So when you say you cull them, you mean you give them away?
Give them away. Certainly there was a period where, guys would just sort of take promos, and I'm like, considering the amount of money I spend on records, it's not like I'm actually ripping anybody off.
No, absolutely.
And I'd heard enough stories of guys who worked at labels in the mailroom and basically took boxes of records and then sold them for drug money or something. So I never felt that bad about it. But, I always plowed it back into the collection.
Yeah.
So, what else have I got here?
Do you ever think, what am I going to do with all this stuff?
Oh, I've discussed this a bit, and I don't think anybody takes it seriously, but I'm thinking of building a sarcophagus and having myself put in there with all of my stuff and an eternity's supply of batteries. It's like, if you can take it with you, I'm going to give it a shot.
What a lovely idea. Well, it's become a major theme on these things. Danny Kelly, who I'm sure you know, friend Danny Baker's a great broadcaster in Britain, and he's moved to Ireland and has all these outbuildings, which he's got one that's just 12-inch singles alone. Fabulous.
Well, this is all in the apartment, and there is order to a degree, but after a certain point,
you can't.
Order becomes pointless.
I
guess this is pretty special for me.
All right.
I don't know if you're going to be able to see the handwriting on it.
All right, go on.
Oh, okay.
Well, you're going to have to tell us.
I'm assuming it's signed by what? Is it?
It's signed by all four Velvets.
Oh my Lord, that's fantastic.
Lou, Mo, Sterl, and John. I got it signed at the rehearsals for their reunion tour in 1993, 92, 93.
Yes, when they played Glastonbury, didn't they? Oh, I saw them. They were fantastic.
I actually saw the Forum show in London and the Wembley show. But I went to the rehearsals and I interviewed everybody. I knew everybody. I knew Lou and John.
Yeah.
I had just met Sterl. I talked to Mo. But I brought this along. And the other part of this story is that this is a mono.
Right.
This is a mono original. Obviously, the banana is still intact.
Yeah.
And the record came to me from my college roommate, who's still one of my best friends. We were roommates for 4 years. He bought a stereo for us to have in our dorm room. And it was one of those really rinky-dink jobs where the speaker was like in the plastic hood. And, it was a piece of shit. But it was great for the dorm. And when he bought it, the salesman said, well, here's a record to go with it. It was like what they carried around for stereo demonstration records. What the stereo, and he gave him this.
That to test the stereo.
To test the stereo. And
that's not a motion with the peel off banana, is it?
And my roommate said, look, you obviously you love this more than I do. You should have it. So I told Lou this story that it was a stereo demonstration record, and he just fell out. He thought, what the hell were they thinking? It's just distortion.
So it is the peel off banana. It's the original sleeve.
It's the banana. It's the original peel off, and it's still there.
Jesus, that's
and
fantastic.
It is mono. It's mono.
Yeah.
So there really was a mono pressing and a mono mix. There's always been some debate whether there was an actual mono mix. Sterling always swore that the mono was better.
Yeah.
So did you ever, even back in the day, did you think, I'll better hang on to that because, you know, people will still be interested in that in 50 years' time or whatever it is.
I said, I'm going to hang on to it because I love it.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I have it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's there for whenever I need it. And so, there was no sense that this is posterity. And in fact, I don't have a lot of autographs, partly because I always felt that when you were going to do these things, do an interview with somebody,
was enough.
You were working. It was a gig.
No, and also it kind of compromises things somehow. It makes you feel uneasy.
It compromises it in the sense that you've erased a line of objectivity.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
You're going in there to do a job, and your
completely
priority is to get the job done. And if the job gets done, then maybe afterwards, if people are feeling loose and comfortable, or in the case of this, this was after several long experiences, years of actually interviewing like Lou and talking to John, and and also sometimes people were like, "Wow, you're really interested in what I do." So I've got, this was actually from the first time I interviewed him, but this is my original copy from 1969.
Yeah.
And you got it signed. Wow.
That's great.
Good rap, Iggy Pop. And
that's really good.
I went on to interview him quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it was like, in a way, in this instance, it was almost the beginning of something. In the case of that Lou thing, it was like, congrats. He actually wrote.
But you're so right.
Whenever I've got anything autographed, I always get it autographed from my wife, because somehow it's like it doesn't involve me. I'm doing this as a favor for my wife. Would you mind signing this?
Yeah, therefore you still feel you have the right to say something even faintly critical in the piece, because it's not a favor for you. Dave very sweetly got a Bob Dylan album signed for my wife, and he signed it, Dave, with his left hand.
With his left hand.
Do you remember? Wasn't that amazing? What a curmudgeon with his left hand.
But I think you're so right about this, because I actually, every journalistic encounter I see nowadays with a famous person always has a selfie.
Yeah.
And the selfie appears on social media. And I sort of think, I think you just,
if someone asks
spoiling
me,
something.
That's
different. Yeah.
That's one thing, but that's not why I'm there. And yes, I do have some really great photos people have taken of me with the artists, but it's because I was invited to do it, or they took it while I would happen to be standing there. I have a picture of me in this courtyard in Tangier in Morocco, watching Mick work with the master musicians of Jajouka. And actually not in the picture, but I wish he was. Also there that day was Paul Bowles.
Right. Okay.
The great, author, who wrote The Sheltering Sky. He was there that day. And I was really nervous about meeting him because I had just started reading The Sheltering Sky. And somebody said, "Would you like to meet him?" I said, "Oh, man, I don't know what I would say." And subsequently, I have collected his books. I've read everything he wrote. I've collected his records. He was a composer in the 30s and a music critic, actually. He was a music critic in the 1940s. But that was my chance to meet Paul Bowles, and I didn't take it. But I was in the space. I got to see. He was just sitting there listening. He knew the master musicians. Those were friends of his.
But it's probably
way before Brian.
You're so far the other side of this line. It's very touching, actually, because most people, I think a lot of people just get into the, depends what you get into the business for. A lot of people got into to meet people and to be photographed.
I got into the business to find out more about how the music was made and what motivated people to do it.
Absolutely,
and that was why I got into it.
Right.
And meeting people and having that discussion was priceless.
I
was not in it to meet people. Who becomes, writers, we're like the secret army. Nobody usually knows what we look like. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I was there to write and to be read. Everything else was gravy.
Yeah. But I suppose nowadays, if you're a prominent musician or author or actor or film director or whatever, you just must expect people to they want their picture taken with you. It's part of the transaction, isn't it?
Well, it's funny. I do get partly because of my hair, and I've been in a few documentaries. People recognize me at gigs or in record stores or even on the street, and if they want to take a picture, cool. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I, however, do not do any social media. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I don't do selfies. I'm just not interested. I would rather write and be published and be known for that. Everything else is like, that's cool. Have fun, but I don't need it. Therefore, I don't bother.
Right. So what are you looking for?
I'm not a good self-publicist, but that's not why I got into it.
So what are you looking forward to doing most at the end of lockdown, or at the end of this bloody war, as we call it?
Well, I'm looking forward to, since I got my second vax, I got my second jab.
Oh, you got your second? Wow.
Oh, you're ahead of us.
Oh.
And so I am looking forward to getting on the subway and going to a record store.
Yeah.
If they're open.
Where are they? Where are they, David,
which ones
nowadays?
are open?
Last time I was in New York, I couldn't see any.
Well, a lot of the stores in the village are gone, and obviously a lot of things are closed, just
at the moment.
period. But there is one store down in Chinatown, Downtown Music Gallery, my guys with the avant-garde, the John Zorn albums, and the experimental jazz and stuff. They're open. I intend to go down
Is
there.
that the last record store? I want to know about this. Is that the last record store in Manhattan, which used to be full of record stores? Are you telling me the last record store is a place selling John Zorn?
John Zorn.
It is definitely one of the last.
Yeah, for A to Z completists. It was Abbott to John Zorn, wasn't it?
Those guys down there are true believers, real spirit.
Yeah.
They're in a basement underneath like a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So you wouldn't notice if you walked past, you wouldn't know they were there.
But it is definitely, it's a destination, as it were.
Yeah.
But, a lot of them move to Brooklyn.
I
But
suppose.
because of the economics, Rough Trade is closing there. They're moving, hopefully, to a new location.
Yeah.
I want to go to gigs. I want to go someplace other than the Upper West Side. And, I know it will happen. It will probably be in a different form. Things will be different. A lot of folks that I know may not be there. There are people that I know who have passed. The great producer Hal Willner.
Right.
Yeah. And, one of the last things I did before lockdown was I wrote liner notes for him for his Mark Bolan tribute, Angel Headed Hipster, which is a fantastic record. So, I was glad I got to do that before he passed. But I definitely want to go to record stores. I want to go to gigs. I just want to, I want to be out. I love this apartment, but I want to be out.
Yes.
Oh, well, we all feel the same way. And we usually end traditionally with the nomination for the greatest record ever made. Did you have a chance to think about that as to anything you might suggest?
Did, actually.
Impossible question, obviously.
I did, actually. And I've actually got two.
You've narrowed it down to two. That's incredible.
I've narrowed it down to two. Well, actually, it usually changes every day, but I sort of went with that which I cannot live without, as opposed to
right. Very good. Very good.
And one of them is this. Let's see if I can take this out of the sleeve.
I think I know what this is.
It looked like a
stone.
stone.
It's a sleeve. It's really important. This is the original first pressing.
Oh, it's the Beefheart. Yes.
Yeah.
Signed by
Don.
Oh, yeah.
By all of them.
No, this is signed by Don.
Right.
Van Vliet, Captain Beefheart, in 1970. I want to say 74.
Hold it up slightly. I just want to see the picture. Oh, that's fabulous.
And he was playing at a club in Philadelphia called the Main Point.
Yeah.
And I had actually worked there for a while, but he had come through, or maybe this was 76. It was in 75 or 76. And he was playing, it was with that, what people call the Tragic Band, unfortunately, but it was a really great gig. It was that band between the classic Magic Band and when he really came back with Shiny Beast and Bat Chain Killer. But I got to talk to him. I went downstairs to the little bit dressing room basement at the club, and he signed it to David Fricke, Love Over Gold. Don Van Vliet, 74, so this is 1974.
Yeah.
Thank you so.
Well, let me tell you, I once in my tradition of always getting records autographed for a friend, I had an old flatmate who was a big Beefheart fan. It was probably the person who introduced me to Captain Beefheart. And when I interviewed Beefheart, I thought I'd go to get some sign, whatever. I think it was Doc at the radar station, something like that. And I said, would you sign this for my friend Stuart? And he said, yes, to Stuart, love over gold, Don Van Vliet.
That was his thing, love over gold, which I thought was one of the most amazing.
It's sweet. It's lovely.
So simple.
Yeah.
So, and he was actually very impressed because that was an original first pressing.
Now, is that mono?
With the
is
red
that
label.
mono?
No, this one is stereo, but it's the red label, the inner sleeve, and it has the original bumper sticker that says, "May the baby Jesus shut your mouth and open your mind." It had everything in it. And I got it. I had actually, the first Beefheart song I ever heard was from that record, Zigzag Wanderer.
Right. Yeah.
And it got played on a radio station in Philly, one of the early FM stations. By the time I looked for the album, it was not in stores, so I ended up buying this instead.
Right, of course.
Strictly personal.
Yeah.
And have since then collected everything.
Right.
But I got to this. One of the stores said, "Look, we can try and order it for you." So we ordered it, and they ended up getting me the first pressing. I don't know how the fuck they found it, but I got the first pressing. That's one of the ones.
Terrific.
Without the other is this.
I love the way you're topping yourself each time. I'm going one louder.
The thing about this record is that I would say, I would nearly go so far as to say it's the greatest album ever made.
Oh, right.
In the sense that it's perfect in every way.
Oh, it's Moby Grape.
The first album. Now, this is the version that had a poster in it. It's got the song lyrics on the front. You can tell it's very worn. This is my original. I actually have probably 5 copies of this record. I have it in mono. I have this. I've got various CDs. I've got the outtakes, all the stuff that goes with it. But I've also got this. This is the original first cover.
Oh Lord, that's brilliant.
No song titles.
Yeah.
Notice Don Stevenson's finger on the washboard.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Oh, well, did they go back and expunge
they went back
that?
And airbrushed that. And you might not be able to see it, but it's autographed.
Oh, good grief.
I got it autographed by Peter Lewis, Jerry Miller, and Bob Mosley when Moby Grape played in New York in 1993 at the Wetlands. It was their first New York show since 1971.
Incredible.
And you may also see the sticker on this.
$1?
$1.
Cost me $1.
Good work.
And
there's no shame in having more than one copy. We know a friend who has 17 copies of Marquee Moon.
What was also very special about that night at the Wetlands, I had written liner notes for a Moby Grape double CD anthology. The first time their stuff had been anthologized at Sony, it was called, what was it called? Essential Grape? It was a 2 CD set. It was the very first time this stuff had been done. And so I got to interview pretty much everybody. Jerry, Bob, Peter, Don Stevenson. I didn't talk to Skip because he was kind of out there at that point. David Rubinson, the producer. And so I got to know Peter and Jerry in particular very well. And when they booked this gig, it was going to be Jerry, Bob, Peter, Sam Andrews, a big brother, was going to play Skippy. Yeah. And they had a drummer, I'm trying to blank on his name. He was a really good drummer. It was just a fantastic way for them to come back to New York. But Peter called me ahead of time and he said, look, we're trying to think of what we're going to do. You know, obviously we have to play the first album. We want to play some other things, but we don't want to just do the first album, you know, because then people think we had nothing else. And I said, well, first of all, you should play Seeing from Moby Grape 69, which is one of Skippy's greatest songs. You know, Bitter Wind from Wow. And I said, you've got to play Dark Magic, which is a piece that was in the Grape's original repertoire in 66 and 67. It was 20 minutes long. It was basically an improvisation with a short vocal bit written by Skip. And I've got it on a bootleg from New Year's Eve, San Francisco 66 at the Avalon. Brilliant. And he said, God, we haven't played that. And I said, really, just blow people's minds. Even if they don't know it, it's going to blow people's minds. They played it.
Oh, right.
And they killed with it.
Terrific.
And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Genuinely satisfied
I've got
customer.
that show on cassette and CD as well.
That's lovely. Brilliant.
So there you have it. Moby Grape. The greatest,
Yeah. Oh, what fun.
Not the greatest record ever made. Certainly the one album I cannot live without.
Yeah.
5 singers, 3 guitar players, 5 songwriters. I defy anyone to do it better.
That's fighting talk. David, it's been a joy. It's been a joy.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
Very good fun.
You know,
Terrific
I wasn't
fun.
sure how to sort of do the do for you, but I hope
You did the do, and you did it splendidly well.
Yeah,
absolutely lovely. Thanks so much. Really good to talk to you.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a View.